This episode is in partnership with Authority Magazine. Authority Magazine, a Medium publication, is devoted to sharing in-depth and interesting interviews featuring people who are authorities in business, pop culture, wellness, social impact, and tech.
Women are used to giving all of themselves to family, career, and community.
But who's there for them when times and situations change?
Today's guest, Patti Clark, is a writer who's made it her goal to help women and men adjust when the nest is empty. Patti, welcome to Believe in People.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much, Amy and Kevin.
Well, I'm really interested in, first of all, you've written 2 books. You wrote This Way Up, 7 Tools for Unleashing Your Creative Self and Transforming Your Life. And also a recent book, Recovery Road Trip, Finding Purpose and Connection on the Journey Home. What inspired you to write these 2 books?
Well, without getting too verbose, which I always have to rein myself in on, the first one, I had been running workshops first of all, for teenagers about self-empowerment. And the parents really loved what was happening with their kids. So they asked me to start running workshops for women. So my friend and I started another charitable trust. They were both charitable trusts to run these workshops for women. And the women consistently said, that was so wonderful, but we want more. Can you make a workbook or something? And that inspired me to write This Way Up. Same format as Recovery Road Trip. Basically, the first half is a allegorical narrative, a story, an idea told through storytelling. And then the second half is a workbook, a journaling workbook that follows the protagonist's experience. And so that's how I wrote This Way Up. And then my next book, I got clean and sober in 1988, just before my 30th birthday. And I was sober for almost 13 years. And then we moved to New Zealand, and I didn't find my community. And so I started drinking again. And I drank for almost 13 years once I had been out. And then I got back into recovery. And I was really, really curious as to what other women's experience was. So this was during COVID, and I was on online meetings a lot. And I started asking other women who had relapsed, out of curiosity, why? What was it? What brought you back? What happened? And the more I learned, I just started taking notes, and it was fascinating. And then I just started getting that tap on my shoulder saying, come on, you got to write a book. Kept saying, no, I don't want to. But I wrote a book.
Good for you.
Well, when you talk, what sorts of experiences do women, I guess we're talking about women at the moment, but people in general, perhaps, well, no, let's stay specific about women at the moment. Why relapse? What, is there an emptiness? Is there a hole in a person's life that needs to be fulfilled, or what?
Well, I'll start with me, and then I'll extrapolate a bit. For myself, to be perfectly honest, I got incredibly arrogant. And that was number one. I felt like, oh, I've got this. I know the program. I've been here for 12 years. I can have a couple of drinks. I'm cool. So that was my first thing. But the bigger piece, to be honest, relates to a wonderful quote by a writer, Johann Hari, who said, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. That ties in a lot to what your interview with Matthew talked about. So what happened to me is I was in a recovery community in Tucson, Arizona, with all of these just vibrant women that were about my age, and we had this amazing community. And then my husband and I moved to a small town in New Zealand that did not have much of a recovery community. And the meetings that were there were 90% old men. And when I was in the room and I was experiencing experiences and emotions, and I would cry and say, I'm struggling. And I was shut down, and it was, put a plug in the jug. You've got one mouth and two ears. Shut up and listen. Come to meetings and don't drink, and you'll be fine. And I was crying, saying, but I'm not. I need so much more than not drinking, because when an addict or of any kind stops the behavior, the reason they started drinking, using, whatever in the first place comes roaring up.
That's still there.
That's still there. And the reason that we started drinking, using, whatever, we're wanting to push down, we're wanting to numb. And when it's removed, it's all there. And so we have to learn new ways of dealing, finding that connection. For me, a lot of therapy. And so that's
interesting.
that's all.
And Patti, so first of all, I want to step back a few steps into what brought you to where you are now, but also I want to come back to women, because you mentioned, and I think this was the trigger, was that women recover and need different kinds of tools. Rather than, men and women are not equal in this case of recovery. So I want to talk about that. But first, what were your parents like? What was your upbringing like?
Yeah, there you go. That's it. My mother was an alcoholic. She died when I was 16. Wow. And that was the big trauma. My father was also an alcoholic, but he was what some call a functioning alcoholic. He looked good. He wore a tie. He drove a nice car. My mother was the mess, right? So she was the identified problem. And so our house was chaos and a lot of craziness. And my sister and I both said, well, I know a way I can stop feeling any pain. And we both went down a road and I grew up in San Francisco in the 60s and 70s, and anything you wanted, you could get your hands on quite easily. And so I did. And so I love, are you guys familiar with Gabor Mate? Any of
Yes, yes.
So what he talks about is that trauma is what brings us to addiction, almost always. And the reason is because we find that which quells that pain. So the addiction serves a purpose, or the substance serves a purpose. It takes us outside of that pain. The problem is that when the addiction itself becomes the problem, then it no longer is working. It's no longer working. And therefore, not why the addiction, but why the pain. And we have to go deeper to find that out. And then if I could really quickly, Kevin, go back to answer your question, a lot of women had different experiences, but a real common thread was that they got over that sort of pink cloud, everything's wonderful, and then wanted more. And if they didn't find that in the recovery circles that they were in, a lot of times they just let it go. And then when you don't have that connection, and women do need more of that connection. Women are seeking more of that emotional connection. Then women stepped away.
What about, you may think that this is not important, but things like becoming an empty nester, retirement, these sorts of things, people who live in rural communities and are isolated, farm families, farm wives, these sorts of people. Do you find that they are confronted with these sorts of challenges? And of course, as you mentioned with New Zealand and the men in the room, there are a lot of people that still believe you don't talk about these kinds of things.
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. So first of all, the whole idea of the empty nest, et cetera, is huge. And when I wrote This Way Up, that's what a lot of the focus was on, because my role is gone. Now, what do I do? It's like I was a great mother, but they don't need me. I'm not needed. And so looking to fulfill it. And when we talk about addiction, I want to go past alcohol and drugs, because what happens with a lot of women, and a lot of people now, but is what other addictions? Well, shopping, food, sex, screens, big screens. Huge one that's like skyrocketing when you look at the graphs is pornography addiction. Massive. And when you talk to the way that that's impacted, that's more men than women, but that's both, how that's impacted people, their relationship to self, their relationship to others. It's destroying lives. So
Respect.
yeah, oh, absolutely. And then when you talk about the isolation in rural communities or in communities when there isn't, when you can't find that connection, we've all read about the epidemic of loneliness. People are lonelier than they have ever been. And, we all have our screens, but we're not finding that connection. And so there's that longing, like there's got to be something more. Yeah.
And I mean, and because you've lived in North America, in New Zealand, now Portugal. What are you finding the communicate your conversations different? Are you having different conversations, or are women primarily needing to recover in the same sort of way? I know everybody's different, but I'm just curious to see what you think about that.
The interesting thing is that once COVID hit, and Zoom exploded,
Yeah.
there were meetings 24 hours a day around the world. So I was able to talk to a lot of women in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, all over America, Canada. So I was able to speak to people in a lot of different places. And I think that, of course, we can't generalize completely, but there's a term in recovery, emotional sobriety, emotional recovery, so that we find, because in recovery, once we get past the elimination of that which we were dependent on, what we learn is a new way of being. And when you are around a group of recovering people, there's very little surface talk. It's like people drop into deep and meaningful real quick. And there's just sort of that need for connection. That really is the essence, the kernel.
Huh.
Have you found in your travels and the fact that you've lived in different cultures, there's so much talk about how, the family is under attack, the family is disintegrating, everyone is looking at a screen, people don't eat meals together anymore, these sorts of things. And I would go along with the suggestion that the fact that people are much more lonely is a result of all these kinds of things and the drive to survive at your job in a cutthroat world. But you live in Portugal now. These are cultures where the family is still very important. Do you notice a difference there? People
Yes.
actually speak to one another in cultures like that.
Yes, yes, yes. Honestly, when I was first here, it's like I would cry. I would walk down this. There's a walking path all the way along the beach where we live, and every weekend and even more in the summer, you see all of these people walking together, multi-generations being together. All the people that we've met here talk about, well, I'm not available Sundays. Sundays are family day. It's that essence is still there. It's massive. And Jeff and I moved here because our kids said, please come to Europe. We want to be closer. Okay, no arguments.
That's great. You could do that.
And we're so privileged, and I totally acknowledge that. And the reason Portugal in the beginning is because Portugal was one of the few places in Europe that said you're welcome.
Mm.
A lot of places in Europe don't want old people, but they said that if you can come here and take care of yourself and aren't going to be a burden on our society, you are welcome. And so that's one of the reasons we chose here. Plus, we had traveled to Portugal many times and love it. And my sister is now moving here into.
Oh, wow.
I'm overjoyed.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, it
So,
is.
Patti, how do you maintain your recovery now? Are you worried that you're going to? I mean, it was 13 years, and then a great long pause, and then how do you cover yourself now?
I'm just over 10 years sober, clean and sober this time. So
Good for you.
thank you. And it does take commitment. But one of the first things I did is I went online, it's like the curse and the gift of technology. I appreciate it beyond measure and I curse it. But anyway, I reached out to, there are lots of forums online, and one of them was about women in northern Portugal. And I went onto the forum and I said, is there anyone in recovery up here? And a woman who lives about 30 minutes north of me said, I'm in recovery. And well, actually, somebody else said, I know somebody who is in recovery, reached out to her. She reached out to me. I said, let's meet for coffee. She came here and she said, let's create a meeting. And I said, fantastic. And so we have. And there's now 5 of us that get together once a week. And we're going to actually try and find a permanent place for it so it can be more open. But for now, we've created it. So what was required was a willingness to be very vulnerable and say, I need this. I can't, I don't want to hide. I don't want to pretend that it's not necessary. I've seen what I'm capable of, and I want to find that connection. And, grateful beyond measure that I did.
Well, I guess I've got a 2-part question. Are you just talking about people who are in recovery when you're offering this advice? Or who are you offering the advice to? And the second part is there a difference between what you're saying and what they say at AA meetings?
Right.
First of all, just for clarification, I'm really not offering advice. What I'm doing is I'm saying
your books. I mean, I'm referring to
no, I understand that. And what the book is a journaling workbook in which, similar to I've been compared to Julia Cameron, which I take as like the ultimate compliment. Basically, what I am suggesting is, if you're feeling some discomfort and lack, and whether it's related to addiction or not, here's a way to get more in touch with self. And so if we were to say some kind of advice, it would be, here are some things that helped me get in better touch with self. And no, it's not just for women in recovery at all. Although, and I am in a 12-step program. So it is AA, NA, Al-Anon, CODA, adult children, all of them, because addiction is addiction is addiction. I think trying to differentiate, in my opinion, is doesn't make a lot of sense. Addicts are addicts are addicts, in my opinion. But what I've also talked to a lot of women who aren't in a 12-step program. There's a great book, Quit Like a Woman by Holly Whitaker, and she doesn't believe in 12 steps. That's not her cup of tea at all. But she talks specifically about why she decided not to drink, and talked to a lot of younger women, especially, about why not to. So for me, I really love the spiritual aspect of 12-step. Not religion, not that at all, but finding that deep spiritual connection to self. But for a lot of women where that doesn't work, it's about finding other women or community that have a similar feel. And now one of my big things that I'm talking about is that alcohol, it's proven time and time again through every study, is toxic. It's a toxic substance. It causes cancer. They're talking about putting labels on it, and just like with cigarettes. And there's no question now. And for women in particular, it causes breast cancer. And women that are drinking a lot, breast cancer statistics skyrocket. So to me, it's like, okay, you don't have to call yourself an addict. You don't have to call yourself an alcoholic. You don't have to follow any rigorous program. But please be aware of the fact that as you're drinking, you're taking in a toxic substance that is really doing harm to your body.
And Patti, I just want to ask last question. What's your favorite part of the work that you do, in the work that you do?
Oh, definitely meeting people and talking and sharing stories and hearing about what their experience has been and where it led them, and coming back, and for lack of a better word, the miracles that keep happening, without the whole religious dogma, but just the things that we say, never could have imagined this, and look what's happening. And to hear it time and time and again, and to feel that connection that happens really quickly with women that share that experience and can say, wow, yeah, I can relate to that. And that's by far my favorite. And I'm on my own. I don't work with anybody else. Nobody, it's just me. So when people write to me and talk and say, wow, I read this and boy, I could relate to that, it makes my heart sing. And I write back immediately and say, thank you, and want to connect, because it makes everything make sense.
Well, isn't it interesting, because I get to ask the last question. But,
Maybe.
Maybe.
And yeah, but
you talk about all these things, and I've noticed that you repeat the words connection.
Yeah.
You repeat the words community, and which is, in a world where we seem to be losing these sorts of things, these have been your cure. After all you've been through, and after all you've seen, why do you still believe in people?
Oh, what a beautiful question. You gave me chills, Kevin. And of course, it's quite fitting with your podcast, but nonetheless, because you're going to make me cry. I have seen the worst of so many people, myself included. I mean, when I got clean and sober the second time, it's because I didn't like me. I looked in the mirror and said, ew, I don't like you when you're like this. And I know you can be better. And meeting people that are any stage of recovery at any level, when they talk about where they were, the path they traveled, and where they are now, oh my God, you can't help but believe in people. You see that miracle right in front of your eyes, where they say, I was living on the street, I was stealing, I was completely cut off from family and friends. And, after this amount of time of choosing to be healthy and choosing to do the work to get me there, here's what's happening in my life now. So of course I believe in people. And of course I believe that all people are absolutely capable of these miracles daily, on a daily basis.
Thanks, Patti. That's very reassuring.
Thank you so much for spending a half hour with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I could keep going, but it's been a wonderful, wonderful half hour. You guys are fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Patti. Appreciate it.
Community. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Kev, I think that what you nailed it. I mean, you really said community, connection, and you said something else, but I can't remember. But however, community and connection are so important. And I think that is the answer, is to, if you're in smaller towns or you're, in areas where you're feeling lonely, is to reach out and connect with those who, because they imagine other people are feeling the same way, but it's just sometimes really difficult to find those people, but, keep looking.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think isolation exists wherever you are. And I think people still, in spite of the digital age we live in, people still need connection and still need community. And if you want to have a little taste of connection and community each week, subscribe to Believe in People or tune in on wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, everyone.